There is a skeleton standing at the center of everything. He does not pace, he does not fidget, he does not glance over his shoulder at the sound of footsteps or wince when someone raises their voice. He simply exists completely, almost insultingly still in a way that living things never quite manage, because living things are always fighting off the awareness of their own fragility. Their hearts beat, their blood moves, their lungs fill and empty and fill again with that faint animal desperation that sits underneath everything we do. The warmth of a living body is, when you examine it closely, the warmth of effort of tiny, ongoing fights against entropy at the cellular level, billions of them, all happening at once without conscious direction, all aimed at the same goal of staying here one more moment. The skeleton has none of that. He has something else instead, a certainty so deep it has become its own kind of silence. His name, or rather, the name that the people of Oo have given him, because a thing like this was never formally introduced to anyone, is the Lich. And if you have spent any time at all in the world of Adventure Time, you already know what that word means when people say it out loud. You know the way conversations change when his name comes up. You know the particular quality of dread that surrounds him, how it is different from the dread that surrounds a regular villain, how it sits lower and colder and further from anything that might eventually get resolved. You know the green flames and the hollow eye sockets and the voice, that low rolling sound like stones grinding in deep water, like something enormous shifting in the dark at the bottom of the ocean, and you know that whenever he appears, the show is asking you to pay attention to something it considers genuinely important. He does not announce himself with music that swells or light that changes dramatically. The show does not need that kind of help when the Lich arrives. What the show knows, what its creators understood from very early on, is that the most effective way to signal danger is through the response of people who are already afraid. When Finn and Jake, who face monsters every day and have never been particularly bothered by any of them, become quiet and small in the Lich's presence, that stillness communicates more than any soundtrack ever could. But here is what I want to spend some time on tonight. Slow and careful and quiet. Not what the Lich does. Not his powers, his schemes, his body count, though we will move through all of that with care. What I want to examine is something harder to pin down. What the Lich thinks, what the Lich believes. What framework sits behind those hollow green eyes when he looks at a world full of living things and arrives, with perfect calm, at the conclusion that all of it should end. Because the Lich has a philosophy, a real one, a coherent, internally consistent way of understanding existence that he holds with more conviction than most characters in fiction hold anything at all. And Adventure Time, which has always been far stranger and far smarter than it first appears, uses that philosophy to ask its audience something genuinely uncomfortable. What do you say back to someone who has decided that nothing matters? What do you say to entropy? What do you say to the dark? Not by arguing with it, at least not by arguing in the conventional sense, not by bringing a logician to a fistfight, but by sitting with the question long enough, slowly enough, in enough detail to understand why the question itself matters, and then by watching, together, what actually happens when the Lich's philosophy is allowed to reach its conclusion. What the universe looks like when the skeleton wins. It is not what he expected. So, get comfortable. Let the room settle around you. Pull the blanket a little tighter, or settle into whatever arrangement your body and your space have arrived at tonight. This is going to take a while. The Lich has been around for 65 million years, and doing his story anything like justice requires some patience. Let's start at the beginning, which, when we are talking about the Lich, is a very long time ago indeed. Before we go any further, if you are watching this from somewhere cozy tonight, from some particular corner of the world at some particular hour, I would genuinely love to know where you are and what time it is. Drop it in the comments, city. Time, whatever feels right. This kind of content finds its way to people in all kinds of places and all kinds of moments, and I find that endlessly interesting. And if this slow, thorough, deep dive style of exploration is something that speaks to you, hitting the subscribe button means this channel gets to keep making things like this. It costs nothing and it matters a lot. Now let's go back before the beginning. Part 1. The weight of a name. The word Lich is old. Much older than Adventure Time. Much older than video games or tabletop role-playing or fantasy fiction as a genre. It comes from Old English lich, a word that simply meant body or corpse. You can still find echoes of it in the English landscape, if you know where to look. A lich gate is the roofed entrance to an English churchyard. the covered stone archway through which a coffin would pass on its way to burial, where the body would rest on the threshold between the world of the living and the ground of the dead, while the priest said the opening words of the funeral rite. The gate itself marks a boundary. The word that names it carries the same idea, something that exists at the edge of ending, that belongs to the space between alive and gone. In the world of Dungeons and Dragons, which gave the word its modern fantasy meaning and sent it flooding into popular culture from there, a Lich is a spellcaster who has cheated death not by surviving it, but by embracing it, by performing rituals of such profound self-destruction that the soul detaches from the living body and lodges itself instead in a small container called a phylactery, leaving the body to die while the animating consciousness goes on, cold and preserved and no longer troubled by the inconveniences of being alive. Hunger, fear, the slow betrayal of the body as it ages, the particular terror of lying awake at 3 a.m. knowing that you are running down. A Lich in the traditional fantasy sense has simply opted out of all of that. They have looked at the messy, frightening, finite business of living and decided they would rather be something else entirely. There is something in this traditional formulation that is, on reflection, very human. The desire for permanence dressed up as a horror, the same impulse that builds monuments and writes books and records songs, the desire to leave something that lasts after the body is done, taken to its most extreme and most grotesque conclusion. Most people express their hunger for continuance through creation. The Lich of fantasy fiction expresses it through preservation, by refusing to let the self go, by treating the end of the body as a problem to be solved, rather than a fact to be accepted. Adventure Time's creators knew all of this when they made their Lich. They knew the genre tradition. They knew what the word carried all of it, the Old English roots and the Dungeons and Dragons derivation, and the decades of fantasy fiction that had used it in between. And what is fascinating, what is worth pausing on right at the start, is the very specific choice they made about how to deploy that tradition and where to diverge from it. The Adventure Time Lich does not want to preserve himself. He is not a spellcaster who feared death. He is not, at his core, a being with a personal stake in his own continuity, working to ensure that his particular consciousness survives. What he wants, the thing he has organized his entire existence around, is the opposite. He does not want to last. He wants nothing to last. His philosophical position is not, I should be permanent, but nothing should be. He is not the selfishness of a person who refused to die. He is the selflessness, if you can use that word with a straight face, about something so horrifying of a force that wants to erase the very concept of self entirely. This distinction matters enormously. It is the reason the Lich feels categorically different from other fictional undead, from other cartoon villains, from almost any antagonist you might compare him to. He does not want power over the living. He does not want to rule what remains after everything else is gone. He does not want subjects, admirers, legacy. He wants the silence that comes after the last conscious thing has stopped being conscious, and he wants it not as a means to some further end, but as the end itself, as the point. In the original pitch document for the show, written by Pendleton Ward and Patrick McHale back when Adventure Time was still just an idea fighting for a network greenlight, there is a passage about the Lich that is so deliberately stark, it almost feels like a warning issued to future writers. The document describes him simply. It says he is powerful. It says he is dangerous. And then it says in capital letters, as though the writers wanted there to be absolutely no ambiguity on this point across any future creative decisions. The Lich King is not funny. Take a moment with that. Let it sit. In a show that was being pitched as a comedy, a wild, absurdist, joke-a-second cartoon about a boy and his magical dog going on adventures in a land full of sentient candy and whimsical dangers. The creators felt so strongly about this particular character's integrity that they had, to specifically state, as a formal creative directive written into the foundational document, that he would not be played for laughs. He would not be softened. He would not be given quirks that made him charming or relatable. He would not do something embarrassing when the plot required him to lose. He would not have a comedic relationship with a sidekick. He would not be given a funny origin story that explained his evil in terms of some wound or slight that we could understand and thereby forgive. He would be something that the rest of the show, for all its brightness and chaos and warmth, could never fully contain. And that choice, that absolute refusal to domesticate him, is the first and most important philosophical statement Adventure Time makes about what the Lich represents. Because other villains in O are funny, even the frightening ones. The Ice King, who kidnaps princesses and causes real harm and has genuine moments of menace, is wrapped in such deep layers of tragedy and absurdism that it is almost impossible not to feel tenderness toward him even at his worst. Hunson Abadir, the Lord of Evil and Marcelin's complicated father, has a whole episode built around his inability to understand why his daughter is upset with him, a very human failing dressed in demonic authority. Even Golb, the primal chaos deity who serves as something like the final cosmic threat of the whole series, gets his edges softened by the circumstances of his resolution, and by the fact that the show finds a way to love even him, in its particular strange way. The Lich gets none of that. The Lich is the place where the show drops the performance of lightness and admits, clearly and without apology, that some things in existence are simply dark, not misunderstood, not redeemable with the right context, not secretly lonely in a way that makes them sympathetic. Just dark, in the oldest sense of the word, the absence of something that makes other things visible. His first appearance is blink and miss it. In the Season 1 episode His Hero, the great warrior Billy describes his past deeds through a song sequence, and for just a moment, barely a second, you can see something in the background of his triumph. Something skeletal, wrapped in green fire, falling. It does not register as a character because the shot does not hold on it. It is there, and then it is not. A piece of context, a shape, a shadow in the mythology of someone else's glory. This is how the Lich is introduced. Not as an active threat with a plan currently unfolding, not as someone the audience needs to immediately understand, but as something that a hero once defeated, and that the world now remembers as a story. As an event that happened, past tense, back when things were dangerous in ways they no longer are. The irony of this introduction, which the show has obviously prepared for, is that the Lich is not past tense at all. He is sealed in amber inside the Candy Kingdom, waiting with the patience of something that does not experience waiting as an inconvenience, listening to the life that moves around him, and not particularly minding that he cannot yet reach it. The story will return. The amber will break. The wheel will begin rolling again. It is not until Season 2, in the two-parter Mortal Folly and Mortal Recoil, that the Lich arrives as an active character in the present tense of the show. He has broken free. And the episode does something quietly remarkable in how it handles the moment there is no grand announcement, no dramatic entrance scoring, no slow reveal designed to make you gasp. The amber cracks and he steps out and he begins walking, and the camera does not make a big deal of this. It simply follows him, and the following is somehow worse than any dramatic flourish would be. The air in every scene he occupies feels different, not louder or more intense, but pressurized, like something very heavy is being held very close. Characters who encounter him respond not just with fear, but with something closer to the animal brain's oldest signal. The one that does not reason. The one that does not consult recent experience or calculate odds. It just knows. Ron Perlman's voice contributes enormously to this effect, and it would be wrong not to spend a moment acknowledging what he does here. If you have heard Ron Perlman in other roles in Hellboy, in Sons of Anarchy, in any of the dozens of films and television shows in which his particular instrument has been put to work, you know what that voice is. It is built low in the chest, generated from somewhere that sounds like bedrock. It does not need to raise itself to fill a room because it has never needed to prove it belongs in any room. There is authority in it that arrives before any content does. Before you have processed a single word, the voice itself has already established a relationship between the speaker and everything around them. When Perlman voices the Lich, he adds one specific additional layer to all of that: deliberateness. A quality of speaking as though words are not urgent, as though the space between phrases is not something to be covered as quickly as possible, but something to be inhabited, because he has all of time available and can afford to let silence do some of the work. When he says fall in the Citadel, and Finn and Jake drop to the ground one syllable, no anger, no emphasis, delivered as a statement of physics rather than a command, the calm of it is more frightening than a shout would be. A shout involves effort. Effort implies that the outcome could have gone the other way. The Lich speaks in a register that does not acknowledge the possibility of other outcomes. And yet, even in those early appearances, even when he is functioning purely as a threat to be defeated and sealed away again, small things accumulate that suggest something more complex underneath. The Lich speaks in complete sentences. He uses words with precision. He does not roar or scream or make sounds of rage. He is never out of control. He is never surprised. When Finn and Jake manage to stop him, when Princess Bubblegum recovers from his possession, when a plan does not go the way it was supposed to go, he does not appear to treat these outcomes as failures so much as delays. Minor interruptions in a larger process that he is entirely confident will eventually reach its conclusion, because he has a theory about how everything ends, and he is patient enough to wait for it. Part 2. Born from Fire and Deep Time. Go back much further than Season 2. Go back further than the Mushroom War, further than human civilization, further than the land of Oo or anything that Oo grew from. Go back 65 million years, to the Cretaceous period, to a world that looks almost nothing like the one we know. A world of shallow inland seas and enormous reptiles and dense humid forests, draped in species of plant that have no modern equivalent. A world in which mammals exist but have not yet decided to become important. The air is warm and thick with oxygen and smells of things we have no words for because no one who could develop words has yet arrived. There is something coming. The episode Evergreen from Season 6 of Adventure Time takes us there or near enough. It is a quiet, slow, almost mythological episode set in deep prehistory, following an ice wizard named Evergreen and his apprentice Gunter during the period when an approaching comet has become the subject of the prehistoric world's most urgent concern. The episode does not make everything explicit. Adventure Time rarely does. But what it shows us is a comet, green-flamed, horn-shaped, moving through the sky with the slow certainty of something that knows where it is going. And around it, the wisest beings of that ancient world make the connection. They see the color of it, the shape of it, the particular quality of dread that it generates in things that can sense what it represents. This comet is going to change everything. Or, more precisely, it is going to end much of what exists, which is its own form of change. The catalyst comets, as the show explains across multiple seasons, are not random astronomical events. They arrive on Earth at roughly 1,000-year intervals, and each one carries what the show calls an agent of change, an embodiment of some cosmic principle deposited into the world to alter its direction in ways that play out over centuries. The comet that carries Finn's essential nature, his past life consciousness, the distilled essence of heroism and goodness, strikes at one point in the cycle. Another comet delivers Orgalorg, the Breaker of Worlds, who is intercepted before he can absorb its power and spends thousands of years compressed into the form of a penguin, his memory of what he once was completely suppressed. Each comet is a delivery mechanism for something that the universe, or whatever intelligences operate at the level of the universe, has determined needs to exist. The Lich was one of those comets. 65 million years ago, something wearing green fire and the shape of destruction entered the Earth's atmosphere and did not stop. This is not stated with textbook bluntness. Adventure Time does not do blunt, but it is established clearly enough across enough episodes that the implication is unavoidable. The mass extinction event that ended the Mesozoic era, the one that cleared the ecological space for mammals to diversify and flourish, and eventually produce something capable of asking questions about itself, is in the mythology of this show the Lich's first act, the first expression, on Earth, of what he is and what he does and what he is ultimately for. Hold that thought for a moment. Really hold it. The show is saying that one of its primary antagonists, a character who spends much of his on-screen time menacing a candy kingdom, and a boy in a white hat, is the same cosmic entity responsible for one of the most transformative mass extinction events in the history of life on Earth. The creatures that had dominated every major terrestrial and marine and aerial ecosystem for over 165 million years. Animals of extraordinary variety and complexity, many of them possessing intelligence, many of them caring for their young, some of them almost certainly experiencing something recognizable as experience. Gone. Not killed in rage, not killed in conflict, cleared away with the same calm efficiency that the Lich brings to everything, because clearing things away is simply what the Lich does. This is the first and most important thing to understand about his philosophy. It is not personal. This is what separates him from virtually every other fictional villain and from every expression of human cruelty that history has recorded. Human violence, even at its most extreme, even at its most ideologically systematized, tends to be entangled with human desires for resources, for territory, for power, for the satisfaction of victory, for the relief of grievance, for the creation of a world that better suits the person doing the violence. Even the worst and most abstract ideological violence, the kind that operates at the level of nations and generations, presents itself as wanting a better world for some group of people. There is, underneath the horror, a human logic, a human selfishness dressed in the clothing of principle. The Lich does not want anything for himself. He does not want to rule what remains after everything else is gone, because he does not imagine there being a after everything is gone in which he occupies any meaningful role. He does not want to sit on a throne of bones and feel the satisfaction of dominion. He does not have an in-group he is protecting or a future he is trying to ensure. He wants extinction total, complete, permanent extinction of conscious life as an end in itself, not as a means to something further, as the point. This makes him philosophically unusual in a way that goes beyond just very evil villain. It makes him a genuine argument, a position that, while reprehensible in its conclusions, has been arrived at through something like reasoning, building from premises that are not obviously false toward conclusions that, if you grant those premises, follow with an uncomfortable kind of logic. The Lich is not the chaos of a tantrum, he is the order of a conclusion. And conclusions that have internal consistency, even terrible ones, deserve to be examined rather than just dismissed, because dismissing them without understanding them is its own form of intellectual vulnerability. The premises, roughly assembled from his behavior and his rare explicit statements across the series, seem to be something like this. First, consciousness creates suffering. Things that can feel pain. Things that form attachments will lose those attachments. Things that can fear death will eventually die, and will know they are dying, and will experience that knowledge as something. The more richly conscious a being is, the more elaborate the forms of suffering available to it. To exist with a mind is to be enrolled, without your consent, in a course of eventual loss. Second, this situation cannot be fixed from within. You cannot solve the problem of suffering by making a better world, because the problem of suffering is a feature of consciousness interacting with time, and no amount of improved social organization, magical intervention, or even divine goodwill changes the fundamental equation. As long as there are things that can feel, those things will suffer. As long as those things are impermanent, their suffering will include the suffering of impermanence. Third, the only true solution is the absence of consciousness itself, not a consciousness that has been improved or comforted or given better circumstances. The absence, the state before there were things that could feel things at all. Fourth, since this is the only true solution, working toward it is the only meaningful thing to do with existence. You can see where these premises lead. You can also see, if you examine them carefully, where they go wrong, and we will get there, in time, when we reach the extinct world and the most devastating thing the show has to say about all of this. But for now, what matters is that the premises are not obviously insane. Philosophers have wrestled with versions of all of them. The problem of suffering is real. The inadequacy of most proposed solutions to it is also real. The idea that existence without consciousness would be an existence without suffering is, at least at the level of formal logic, correct, though the missing premise, the one the Lich never examines, is whether an existence without suffering is therefore better than an existence with it. And then there is the added dimension of Golb. Golb is Adventure Time's name for the principle that the Lich serves. The primal chaos, the force that predates the universe's current iteration, that exists at the conceptual level below physics, that entropy is slowly and inevitably working toward from the inside. Golb is not a character with preferences in the way that most characters have preferences. Golb does not want things the way that conscious beings want things. Golb is more like a direction, a vector in cosmic space that everything is already pointed toward, that the second law of thermodynamics is describing in mathematical language, that the Lich has dedicated his entire existence to accelerating. In Gold Stars, speaking through Sweet Pea, the Lich describes a time before time, a state before anything, and before even that nothingness monsters, primordial things, writhing in an eternal dark, predating the formation of the universe's current order. These monsters are fragments or aspects or agents of Golb, and the Lich is the last one still operational in the current universe. He calls himself, in whispers, the last scholar of Golb. The word scholar is chosen with care, not servant scholar. Someone who has studied the deepest principle available to study and organize their existence around that understanding. This is devotion. Absolute, sustained, 65 million-year devotion to a God that exists at the level of a physical law rather than a person, to a principle rather than a relationship, to something that cannot receive devotion but that the Lich offers it to anyway, because the offering has become identical to who he is. Part 3. The Mushroom War and the Making of a Monster. Approximately 1,000 years before Finn and Jake are running through the land of Oo, before the Candy Kingdom existed in its current form, before Marceline was a vampire queen ruling the night, before any of the landscape we think of as Adventure Time's setting had taken its current shape, the world that existed before Oo destroyed itself. The Mushroom War. Adventure Time gives this name to the apocalypse that reshaped everything and does not explain it in a single convenient exposition dump. Instead, it reveals it in fragments, over seasons, through what survives. Ruins half buried in candy landscapes and forest floors. The way certain characters refer to time in terms of what happened before or after a particular moment. The existence of the crown and the ice, and the vampire who was a child when the bombs fell. The almost total absence of other humans in a world where every piece of background architecture suggests that millions of people once lived there. We never see the war directly, because Adventure Time understands that the most frightening things are not the ones you show in full, but the ones you suggest through their aftermath. What we have instead is the world that the war made. And the world that the war made is not a wasteland, it is Oo. It is bright and strange and full of life and magic and adventure. It just happens to also be built entirely on the bones of everything that came before. What happened was nuclear. Specifically, though, the show does not use that exact word with the bluntness of a news broadcast. A weapon was detonated. Not a regular bomb in any meaningful sense, but something designed to transform rather than simply destroy. To change the fundamental nature of the world rather than simply damage a portion of it. The show calls it the Mushroom Bomb. The name carries all the weight that it needs to carry. The mushroom cloud is one of the most recognizable images of the 20th century. One of the few images that has successfully communicated the idea of a threshold has been crossed. The world that existed before this moment is not coming back to the collective human imagination. Adventure Time does not need to explain the reference. It trusts you to feel it. The mushroom bomb's energy, sickly green, radioactive in some magical sense that goes beyond conventional nuclear physics, capable of altering the biology of everything it touches, is the same energy as the Lich, the same color, the same quality of wrongness. And the implication that accumulates over multiple seasons of careful storytelling is that this is not a coincidence. The Lich's essence, the cosmic passenger that hitched a ride on the green catalyst comet 65 million years ago, was somehow incorporated into the bomb's construction. Maybe deliberately, by people who understood what they were working with and decided to use it anyway, in the way that terrible weapons are always built by people who understood what they were building and decided to use it anyway. Maybe through a convergence of factors that amounts to the same thing even if the intent was absent. When the bomb detonated, when the blast wave moved outward, and the contamination began its slow spread through the atmosphere and the soil and the water and the biology of everything that survived the initial explosion, the Lich stepped out of the smoke. Wearing someone. Prismo's description of this, delivered in that tired, matter-of-fact way that Prismo has of discussing terrible things, is the one that stays with you. A ghost wearing a dead man. That is what the Lich is, not a creature. Not a being of flesh and bone who happens to look skeletal. A ghost, an ancient consciousness, a fragment of something that predates the universe's current iteration, inhabiting the physical remains of a person who did not survive the blast. Think about what this means for a moment. That skeleton, the one with the horns and the hollow eyes and the crown of bone, the one whose image has become synonymous with cosmic evil across Adventure Time's mythology, is a person. Was a person? Someone who had a name, presumably before the bomb fell. Someone who had whatever a life in pre-war civilization looked like. Who made choices and had preferences and probably cared about at least some of the things around them. We do not know who that person was. The show does not tell us, and probably cannot, given that the Lich has been wearing them so long and with such complete occupation that there is nothing left of the original inhabitant to learn from. The body is the Lich now, and the Lich feels nothing about the person it once was, because the Lich does not experience guilt or grief or the particular discomfort of knowing that you are wearing someone else's remains without their permission. Those are emotional experiences available to things that place value on persons as ends in themselves, and the Lich's philosophy does not have that category. In his framework, a person is a temporary organization of matter that has been briefly structured into something that can feel and think and suffer, and that will eventually be restructured into something that cannot. The organization is already unraveling before it has properly begun. There is no person there to wrong, because personhood, in his understanding, is a story that matter tells itself for a brief time before returning to its more natural condition of not being a story at all. The allegorical reading of the Lich as nuclear war is one that the show's creators have never had to spell out directly, because they built it into the fabric of every choice about his design. The green color, the specific sickly green that attaches to nuclear imagery in popular culture, to the glow of radioactive material, to the mutation that radiation causes in biology, the way his presence causes living things to decay and die at an accelerated rate, as though his existence is itself a kind of radiation poisoning for everything in his vicinity. The fact that he emerged from a bomb and continues to inhabit the world that bomb created, wandering through the consequences of the single worst decision a civilization ever made. The fact that he cannot be permanently killed, cannot be fully contained, keeps returning no matter how many times he appears to have been defeated a long half-life, in both the literal nuclear sense and the mythological sense that the show builds around him. He is what humanity made when it decided to weaponize the worst thing the universe had ever produced. He is the consequence of that decision, walking through the world that the decision created, looking at all the mutated descendants of the people who made that decision, and seeing only confirmation that the decision was always going to end this way. And he is not wrong that the world he inhabits is a world defined by that decision. He is just wrong about what to do about it. He is just wrong about whether doing something about it matters, or whether the something available makes the situation better or worse. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can examine his philosophy in full, we need to understand how he moves through the world, the method by which something that is fundamentally a ghost interacts with the physical space of Wu. Part 4. A Ghost Wearing a Dead Man. The Philosophy of Possession. There is something the Lich cannot do that beings with his level of power might be expected to manage without difficulty. He cannot simply exist on his own terms as a free-floating consciousness, choosing actions and enacting them directly through pure force of will. He needs a body. Not because he is weak, everything we see of him when he has access to a body suggests the opposite of weakness, but because he is, at his deepest level, a spirit, an ancient consciousness, a fragment of Golb's nature given the form of a mind. And to interact with the physical world, to speak and to move and to corrupt and to plan, he must be wearing something that actually belongs to the physical world. This necessity produces the possession, the pattern that runs through so many of his appearances, and that, when you examine it philosophically rather than just narratively, reveals something strange and uncomfortable about what identity actually means. He possesses Princess Bubblegum first, in the Season 2 finale, and it is disturbing in a very specific way. She becomes something else, pale and hollow-eyed and wrong in her body language, speaking in a voice that is not hers, pursuing goals that are not hers, using the physical fact of herself as a vehicle that has been borrowed without the slightest acknowledgement that borrowing was occurring. The horror of watching this is partly that Princess Bubblegum is a character the audience has invested in someone with a whole established personality, a mode of being, a set of concerns and habits that make her herself rather than someone else. Seeing those things displaced is uncomfortable in the way that it is always uncomfortable to watch personhood get subordinated to something impersonal. But there is a deeper horror underneath the character horror, a philosophical one. The show is demonstrating that the body and the consciousness that inhabits it are separable, that the thing which makes Princess Bubblegum herself is not her physical form, which continues to function perfectly well under the Lich's occupation, but something more nebulous, some pattern of memory and disposition and ongoing choice that has been temporarily pushed aside. The body goes on doing body things. The princess is not there. Where is she? That question does not have a comfortable answer, and Adventure Time does not try to provide one. The possession of the waving snail, the tiny creature whose background appearances in hundreds of episodes form one of the show's most extended running gags, is where the Lich's approach to inhabiting other bodies becomes most philosophically explicit about what he thinks he is doing. The snail appears in almost every episode. It waves. For years, This is just a charming piece of production design, a hidden character for attentive viewers to find in each frame, the way you might look for a specific motif in a Where's Waldo image. And then the revelation arrives. The snail has been the Lich's vessel for much of the show. The Lich has been present, in the background of hundreds of episodes, doing nothing, simply existing within a small and unnoticed form while the story unfolds around him. Watching, waiting, letting time pass in the patient way that things pass for something that does not measure time the way living creatures measure it. This is a perfect expression of his relationship to urgency, which is to say, he has none. He does not need to make his move before a deadline. He does not need to act before the heroes are ready. He does not experience the compression of limited time that drives most narrative tension. He is on his own schedule, and his schedule is geological. While Finn and Jake adventure and grow and change and learn things about themselves and the world around them, the Lich is there in the background, snail-shaped, waiting for the conditions to be right for the next step. The possession of Billy is where the possession motif becomes most philosophically loaded, carrying a weight that goes beyond mechanics and into something that feels like deliberate cruelty, though the Lich does not experience it as cruelty, because cruelty requires caring about the thing you are cruel to, and the Lich does not care about anything in the way that cruelty requires. Billy is the great hero of Oo, the legendary warrior who defeated the Lich himself, who stands in Finn's mythology as the proof that heroism is possible, that the worst things can be faced and overcome, that strength and goodness together amount to something real. Finn looks up to Billy the way young people look up to the best version of what they are trying to become, not with uncritical worship, but with genuine, earned admiration for someone who has done the thing that Finn himself is working toward. And it is Billy whose body the Lich chooses as his next instrument. The hero who beat him becomes the mask the Lich wears to approach Billy's most devoted admirer and manipulate him into helping dismantle the last defenses against the very thing Billy spent his life fighting. The strategic logic is obvious and does not need extended treatment. What is worth dwelling on is the philosophical content of the choice. The Lich has taken the symbol of hope, the embodied proof that he can be stopped, and turned both of those things into a surface to wear. He has converted the argument against him into a vehicle for his own purposes. He has used the thing that meant resistance works to demonstrate that resistance ultimately changes nothing. From the Lich's perspective, this is not ironic. It is simply accurate. Heroism is temporary. Heroes end. The bodies they occupy become available, eventually, for other uses. The choice of Billy's body is not gloating, it is a statement about timescales. From long enough away, the defeat and the body and the new occupation are all just steps in the same process. But the possession motif, running through all of these instances, forces a philosophical question that Adventure Time asks without always answering directly. What is a person, really, if the body can be separated from the consciousness? If Princess Bubblegum's form can walk around pursuing someone else's goals without her consent, what was it about her that was actually Princess Bubblegum? Where does the person end and the vessel begin? Is the face doing the betrayal when Billy's face is used to deceive Finn? Or is it just a surface, innocent material that has been put to use by something that cares nothing for the meaning the face carried to those who loved the person it belonged to? The Lich's answer to these questions, implicit in every possession, is simple and complete. There is no meaningful distinction between person and vessel. A person is a pattern of matter animated by a consciousness, and when the consciousness changes, the person changes. There is no soul that persists unchanged through transformation, no essential self that remains itself regardless of what happens to the body or what occupies it. There is just information, temporarily organized, and the organization is already starting to unravel before it has properly begun. This is one of the darker philosophical positions available to a conscious being, the view that identity is entirely contingent, that the self is a story the brain tells itself about continuity that has no more ultimate reality than any other story. Modern neuroscience has its own versions of this argument, considerably less melodramatic than anything the Lich offers, but philosophically adjacent in interesting ways. The self as an ongoing construction rather than a fixed entity. Consciousness as a narrative rather than a substance. Identity as something that gets rebuilt moment to moment rather than something that simply exists. The Lich dramatizes the darkest implications of these ideas in a way that academic philosophy cannot, because he can demonstrate them in action. When he inhabits someone, he is not doing something to them in his own understanding. There is no them to do something to. There is just a body, and whoever or whatever is currently running it, and the current operator has changed. The previous occupant is not missing, from his perspective, because the previous occupant was never a fixed thing to begin with. This is not a comfortable thought. But the Lich is not in the business of comfortable thoughts. He is in the business of logical conclusions, followed wherever they lead, regardless of how the landscape looks when you arrive. Part 5. The Ceaseless Wheel. His philosophy, fully examined. While the mortal world doubts and questions, I know exactly what I am. I am the Ceaseless Wheel. The last scholar of Golb. I am your doom. These are the Lich's words in the episode Whispers, delivered to Finn during one of their later encounters, and the full sentence rewards the kind of attention that most cartoon villain dialogue does not demand. Every phrase in it is doing something specific, building an argument that is not trying to convince Finn but simply to state, as calmly and completely as possible, what is true. While the mortal world doubts and questions, this is not an insult. The Lich is not belittling mortality's uncertainty as a personal failing. He is describing what he observes as one of the defining characteristics of conscious life, the condition of not fully knowing. Finn doubts his choices. Jake questions what the right thing to do is in any given situation. Princess Bubblegum, the most scientifically rigorous character in the show, conducts experiments precisely because she does not know the answers in advance. Every living character in OO operates under a permanent condition of partial ignorance, of having to make decisions with incomplete information, of having to update understanding as new evidence arrives. This is not weakness, it is what finite minds look like, operating within a universe that is larger than they are. The Lich exists outside this condition. Not because he is smarter than everyone else, though the sheer duration of his experience would make him formidably knowledgeable in almost any domain. He is certain not because he has reasoned his way to certainty, but because his certainty does not come from reasoning at all. It comes from identity. He is the conclusion rather than the person who reached it. He does not need to think about whether extinction is the right goal, because he is not a thinker who arrived at the goal through deliberation and chose to commit to it. He is, at whatever level one can use that word about something like the Lich, the goal itself taking physical form, wearing a body, moving through the world that it intends to end. You cannot doubt what you are in the way that you can doubt a belief, because what you are is prior to any believing you might do. The Ceaseless Wheel. This is the metaphor the Lich reaches for most consistently when he describes himself across the series, and it is worth unpacking slowly. A wheel rolls. It moves forward. It does not stop at any particular point and decide it has gone far enough. It does not change course because something in its path tries to redirect it. It does not wear down in the way that something with more complicated moving parts wears down. It is geometrically simple, functionally perfect, sustainable across any distance if the surface is there. It does not care about the ground it covers. It does not remember what was under it before. And crucially, a wheel that has been stopped has not been defeated. It has been paused. The conditions that made it roll will return, eventually, and when they do, the wheel rolls again. Every apparent defeat of the Lich, the Amber, the Citadel, the Baby, the Hand, the farm world version has this quality. He does not lose. He pauses, and then he resumes. The Buddhist resonance of the wheel image is something the show is not careless about. The wheel of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, the ongoing loop of existence that is, in Buddhist thought, the source of suffering from which enlightenment offers escape, is one of the most recognizable symbols in Eastern philosophy. The Lich's use of the same image is an inversion of its traditional meaning. In Buddhist cosmology, the goal is to exit the wheel to achieve the state beyond the cycle, the stillness that comes after the ending of craving. The Lich does not want to exit the wheel. He does not want to be still in the Buddhist sense of serene awareness. He wants to be the wheel, to be the process itself, the mechanism of the cycle's eventual ending, the thing that keeps rolling until there is nothing left for it to roll over. He is not trying to achieve peace. He is trying to achieve the condition that precedes the need for peace, by eliminating the consciousness that would otherwise need to find it. The last scholar of Golb. We have touched on this already, but the word scholar continues to reward attention. Scholars are people who dedicate their lives to understanding something larger than themselves. The relationship between a scholar and their subject is, at its best, one of genuine devotion, not the domination of the subject, not the extraction of the subject's value for personal gain, but service to the subject's fullest expression. A great scholar of Shakespeare does not want to control Shakespeare. They want Shakespeare to be fully understood, to be given the attention it deserves, to reach the audience it has always been reaching toward. A great scholar of physics does not want to conquer physics. They want physics to be as fully known as possible. The Lich is, in this reading, Golb's most devoted interpreter. He has spent 65 million years trying to understand and enact the principle that Golb embodies. He has not added to that principle. Chaos and entropy are what they were before the Lich arrived, and will be what they are after the Lich is gone. But he has given his existence to propagating it in the way that scholars propagate their subject by engaging with it and teaching it and making it present in the world. The tragedy that we will see fully realized in the extinct world is encoded in this word. A scholar needs the subject to be alive to have new dimensions to explore, new aspects to encounter, new ways of being understood. Golb, as a principle of chaos and ending, does not have new dimensions. It has one dimension, and it will have that dimension whether or not the Lich dedicates himself to it. The Lich's scholarship is a one-way relationship, because his subject cannot acknowledge that the relationship exists. I am your doom. The word doom is carefully chosen. Doom is not the same as death, though death is part of it. Doom is the specific, personal, unavoidable end of something that had a future, something that could have continued, should perhaps have continued, but will not because of what is coming for it. And doom, unlike death, implies a judge. Something that has decided, something with the weight of inevitability behind it. When the Lich says this to Finn, he is not simply threatening Finn personally. He is making a cosmic claim that the hope Finn embodies, the heroism, the optimism, the insistence that things can be better and that effort makes a difference, will eventually be extinguished by what the Lich represents. That entropy is the final evaluator of all heroism, that the verdict, at the level of geological time, is already in. Doom is not something the Lich is doing to Finn. Doom is what Finn already has, by virtue of being a finite conscious being in a universe that is not finite and not conscious. The Lich is just carrying it, delivering it, being the present tense face of the future tense fact. And here is where the argument becomes genuinely interesting rather than just dark. Because the Lich is right about some of this. He is right about entropy. He is right about impermanence. He is right that the heat death of the universe is a real physical projection. He is right that every individual consciousness that has ever existed has ended or will end. He is right that no amount of heroism changes these facts at the level of physics. Where he is wrong is in the move from "this is true" to "this is the only thing that matters." And understanding why that move is wrong requires understanding what the Lich has never experienced and what the show spends its entire run demonstrating through the characters it loves most. Part 6. The Wish and Farm World. When evil fails at its own goal, there is a room that exists at the center of time. It is outside normal reality, but touching all of it simultaneously, every timeline, every possible version of every moment that has happened or will happen, all of it visible from a single position if you know how to look at the screens. The room is furnished like someone's idea of a perfect hangout space. Beanbag chairs, a jar of very carefully maintained pickles, and Prismo, the Wishmaster, two-dimensional and pink, and endlessly patient and more than a little lonely, who will grant any wish to any person who arrives at his door. One wish per customer, any wish clearly stated. This is the fundamental law of Prismo's existence, the rule that is older than any of the arrangements around it. He cannot refuse. He cannot redirect. If you can find the time room and speak your wish clearly, reality bends to accommodate what you have said you want. The Lich gets there at the end of Season 4, and the path he takes to the time room is itself instructive about his approach to problem solving. He inhabits Billy. He manipulates Finn, who trusts Billy with everything, who cannot imagine that the hero of his childhood is wearing a different driver, into gathering the gems of the Enchiridion and reassembling them into a key that opens a portal between realities. He steps through. He reaches the time room, and he makes his wish. I wish for the extinction of all life. 5 words. The most economical possible compression of his entire philosophy into a form that Prismo's rules can process. And he has done his research. He knows about one wish per customer. He knows about clarity of statement. He has navigated through months or years of planning, through Billy's skin and Finn's trust, and the assembled power of an ancient artifact, specifically to stand in this room and say these 5 words. Because the most efficient path to his goal runs through a wish rather than through direct action, and the Lich is always, above everything else, efficient. Prismo, whose face in this moment carries something that looks very much like sadness, grants the wish. But Finn, in the same moment, makes a counter-wish. He wishes the Lich had never existed. And this creates Farm World, a divergent timeline in which the mushroom bomb was never detonated without the Lich's essence incorporated into it. There was apparently no catalyst for the specific kind of destruction the bomb caused, and so the apocalypse that created Ooh did not happen. In this farm world, Finn's birth parents are alive. The human civilization of the pre-war era continued. The land of Ooh never formed. Marcelin is old and wandering, and has not become a vampire yet. Simon Petrikov is aged and unstable, the Ice Crown slowly winning, but has not yet fully lost himself inside it. This is a world without the Lich, a world where the primary source of cosmic evil in the main timeline never arrived. And Farm World is not a paradise. This is the most important thing the Farm World arc does, philosophically speaking. If the Wish had created a world of uncomplicated peace and goodness, a world where the removal of the Lich corresponded cleanly to the removal of suffering and conflict, that would be an endorsement, unintentional or otherwise, of the Lich's implicit claim that his presence is the unique source of the problem. It would suggest that evil is the Lich, and the Lich is evil, and they can be separated from each other and from everything else. But Farm World has conflict. Farm World has cruelty. Farm World has its own disasters unfolding in slow motion. And Farm World eventually has its own Lich, because Farm World Marcelin, backed into a desperate corner by circumstances the main timeline never produced, releases the mushroom bomb in a version of events that creates a different Lich from different material, but with the same terrible result. The Farm World Lich inhabits Farm World, Finn's father. And the Wish that was supposed to solve the problem has, in creating an alternate dimension, produced a version of the problem that is in some ways worse than the original. This is the show's most direct engagement with the philosophical problem of evil, specifically with the question of whether evil is something that can be removed from the world by removing its specific source, or whether it is a property of the world itself that will find expression through whatever channels are available. The Lich is removed, and evil does not go away. Evil reorganizes. It finds new shapes, new vectors, new bodies to inhabit, new circumstances to exploit. The specific horror changes. The underlying fact persists. For the Lich's philosophy, this is simultaneously a kind of validation and a kind of indictment. It is a validation because it confirms something the Lich has always maintained. Suffering and destruction are not aberrations in existence, not mistakes that a better version of the world would have avoided. They are features, built into the fabric of consciousness interacting with scarcity and time and impermanence. Remove the Lich, and you do not remove suffering. You just change who is causing it and what form it takes. But it is an indictment because the show is making clear, simultaneously, that the Lich is not a solution to the problem he identifies. His presence does not accelerate the world meaningfully toward the quiet he wants. It does not reduce net suffering, it increases it, because the suffering he causes is additional to the suffering that would exist without him, rather than a replacement for it. He is not a cosmic mercy. He is just more disaster in a world that already had plenty. The wisdom available in the Farm World arc, if you are the Lich and capable of learning from evidence, which is unfortunately a significant if, would be something like, your intervention is not required. The universe is already moving in the direction you care about. Entropy is already happening. Things are already impermanent. You are not needed. You are not special to the process. You are just additional noise in a system that was already going where it was going without you. This is not, of course, how the Lich reads the situation, but it is how the audience is invited to read it. Part 7, The Fall Speech. The Grandeur of Impossible Ambition. Season 6 opens with the double episode Wake Up, Escape from the Citadel. And these 2 episodes together represent the Lich at his most cinematically powerful. The point in the show's run where his philosophy and his presentation most completely align, where you see not just what he wants but how he thinks, the full scope of the vision he has been carrying for 65 million years. The Citadel is a prison at the center of the multiverse. It is built by entities of sufficient cosmic power to contain the worst things that exist across all possible realities, beings who have committed crimes so severe, at such a scale, that imprisonment in a single universe is deemed insufficient. Its walls are tended by guardians of immense power. Its inmates are the worst things that have ever lived anywhere in the multiverse, held in perfect stasis, unable to do further harm as long as the Citadel holds. The Lich's plan, when you lay it out, is genuinely remarkable in its willingness to pay costs. He needs to get inside the Citadel. The only way to get inside without being permanently imprisoned is to commit a cosmic crime of sufficient magnitude to warrant the Citadel's attention. So the Lich commits one. He murders Prismo. He wakes the old man, the dreaming human, whose sleep is the substance of Prismo's existence, and by waking him, destroys the dream, which is the same as destroying Prismo. A Wishmaster is dead. This qualifies. He is crystallized and transported to the Citadel. He allows this to happen. He has calculated what the plan costs: his freedom, his access to everything outside the Citadel, his ability to operate without constraint, and paid it without hesitation, because the asset inside the Citadel is worth the price. The worst things that have ever existed across all of reality, imprisoned and powerless and desperately wanting to be neither if he can release them, if he can form them into something directional. He does not have a scheme for anymore. He has a scheme for everything, for every timeline in which life has established itself, and then, inside the Citadel, having begun his destruction of the structure from within, he delivers his speech. Fall. The word lands and Finn and Jake land with it. You are alone, child. The child observation is doing multiple things simultaneously. The Lich is 65 million years old, at minimum. Everyone alive is a child by his reckoning. But more than that, the word places Finn within a framework in which youth, the brevity of individual consciousness, the limited time and limited experience available to any particular being, is the relevant context for evaluating what Finn brings to this moment. The heroism that Finn embodies is the heroism of someone who has been alive for a few hundred seasons, in a world that is 1,000 years removed from its own near-total destruction. Against the Lich's temporal scale, that heroism is very young indeed. There is only darkness for you, and only death for your people. The accuracy of this statement at a long enough view is what makes it so heavy. Eventually, yes, darkness comes for every particular consciousness. Death comes for every particular people. These are not threats that the Lich is making, they are facts that he is describing. Facts that will be true regardless of what happens in this particular confrontation. He is not going to cause these outcomes through his specific actions against Finn in this moment. They are already scheduled. These ancients are just the beginning. The beings imprisoned in the Citadel are described as ancient criminals, entities whose crimes predate the current era, who committed their offenses against the structure of reality at such a scale that the multiverse decided they needed to be permanently removed from circulation. They are not allies of the Lich in any conventional sense. They do not share his philosophy or serve his goals. But they are the worst things that have ever existed, and the worst things that have ever existed, released into an open multiverse, will generate the kind of disorder and destruction that moves the universe in the direction the Lich has always been oriented toward. I will command a great and terrible army, and we will sail to 1 billion worlds. 1 billion worlds. The scale of this ambition is not bounded by not bounded by this earth or this reality, not bounded by anything that the story has previously established as the relevant scope for the conflict between Finn and the forces of destruction. The Lich has a plan for everything, for every timeline in which life has managed to establish a foothold, every consciousness that has arisen somewhere in the multiverse and built something and been afraid of ending. His army would move through all of it, and the word sail is worth dwelling on. Sailing is not violent, in the conventional sense. Sailing is movement purposeful, sustained, not aggressive in any small or personal way, just moving through a medium from one point toward another. The Lich imagines the campaign of extinction as a voyage, patient, sustained, inevitable. He will get where he is going. He always does, eventually. We will sail until every light has been extinguished. Every light, every consciousness, every place where the darkness of the pre-conscious universe has been locally interrupted by something that can feel and think and be afraid of ending. The Lich wants the interruption to stop. He wants the original condition to be restored, the state before the catalyst comets began depositing agents of change, before life discovered the trick of organizing matter into things that could experience their own existence. He wants the universe to be, once again and permanently, what it was before any of this began. You are strong, child. But I am beyond strength. I am the end. The acknowledgement of Finn's strength is the most frightening part. The Lich is not saying Finn is weak or wrong or misguided. He is saying that Finn is strong within a category, the category of things that exist and have capacities, and can apply those capacities to the world, and that being the end is a different kind of thing, a category unto itself, one that exists outside the framework where strength or weakness is measurable. You cannot be stronger than the concept of ending. You cannot outfight impermanence. You cannot be heroic enough that the heat death of the universe decides to spare you personally. Finn does not defeat the Lich here. What saves him is not anything he brings to the confrontation, but something accidental. The mortally wounded Guardian bleeds, and Guardian blood has healing properties. And those properties transform the Lich rather than healing him. The Guardian blood cannot make the Lich healthy because the Lich has no health to restore. Instead, it gives him organs and skin and the form of something new, something that does not remember being what it was. The Lich becomes a baby, large and confused and innocent and reaching for the world with hands that were not long ago capable of commanding a universe-ending army. Part 8. Sweet Pea. When the ceaseless wheel becomes a child. There is a baby now in the land of Oo. He is very large and mostly harmless and does not know his own name. He wears the Lich's horns, emerging from under new pink skin, one of them broken at the tip. His eyes, when you catch them in the right light, are green. When he cries, and he cries often, because he is a baby, and that is what babies do when the world is too large and too confusing, and there is nobody holding them yet. The sound carries something in it that makes the air around it feel slightly strange. Not threatening, just resonant, the way a room resonates differently when something heavy has been removed from it. Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig adopt him. They call him Sweet Pig Trunks Sweet Pea, and they love him immediately, without conditions, without the love needing to be earned or the child needing to demonstrate worthiness. He is their son. That is the whole of the relevant information. This is one of Adventure Time's Part 3, Extended. The nuclear allegory and what it means for the Lich's nature. There is a specific kind of horror that belongs to things that were made by people and then escaped their control. Not monsters that arrived from outside the world. Not gods or demons from some beyond those can be treated as external, as invasions, as the world being attacked by something fundamentally foreign to it. The horror we are describing is different and quieter and much more difficult to resolve because it cannot be expelled from the world by any amount of effort or heroism. It is already inside. It was built in. The Lich was built in, not by malice, or at least, not by the malice of any individual who understood what they were building. The Mushroom War was fought by people who understood at some level the magnitude of what they were doing. History is full of such people. The development of nuclear weapons in the mid-20th century of our own world was conducted by many individuals of genuine intelligence and moral seriousness, who understood the scale of what they were creating and who struggled with that understanding in various ways throughout their lives. They built the thing anyway, for reasons that seemed at the time to override the struggle, competitive pressure, fear of an adversary building it first, the logic of deterrence, the belief that having the capability would prevent its use, the various arguments that have been made about terrible weapons throughout history. Adventure Time does not relitigate any of this in explicit terms. It does not need to. The Mushroom War is a shadow that falls across the entire show. And the Lich is its specific, concentrated form, the worst thing that the worst moment in human history produced, still walking around 1,000 years later, still pointed at the same goal it always had. The bomb went off. The bomb's intent, crystallized into a form that cannot be dissipated or neutralized or diluted by time, wanders through the world the bomb created. This is the allegory's most precise point. The destructive intent of a weapon does not disappear when the weapon is detonated. It goes somewhere. It takes some form. It persists in the consequences, in the mutations, in the ruined landscape, in the absence of people who were there before. The Lich is what persists. He is the intent, wearing a body, outlasting the conflict that produced him by 1,000 years and still counting. And what does the allegory suggest about what we do with this? About how you live in a world where the worst things that were ever made continue to exist in consequence form, where the decisions of the past continue to shape the present in ways that no current generation chose? Adventure Time's answer, spread across its entire run. is something like, "You do not resolve the legacy of destruction by ignoring it or by refusing to look at it. You do not make things better by pretending the Lich is not in the world. But you also do not allow the existence of the Lich to become the only relevant fact. The existence of the worst thing does not eliminate the existence of everything else. The Candy Kingdom is built, partly, on the ruins of what came before, but it is also built. It exists. The people in it love each other and make terrible decisions and grow and change and die and are mourned. The ruins and the kingdom occupy the same landscape, and the relevant question is not how to resolve this coexistence, but how to live fully within it. Finn manages this by not treating the past as the most important room in the house. He knows about the Mushroom War in the abstract way that a person living 1,000 years after an event knows about it as history, as context, as something that explains why the world is the way it is without being something he personally carries responsibility for. He is not burdened with guilt about what came before him. He is focused on what is happening now, what the person in front of him needs, what the situation directly in front of him requires. This focus on the present moment is not naivety. Finn is not unaware of history. It is a choice, a way of relating to the inherited disaster of the world that does not let the disaster become determinative. The Lich, conversely, is the inherited disaster demanding to become determinative. He is the past insisting on its right to shape the present without being subject to revision by the present. He is the bomb still going off, in slow motion, 1,000 years later. And the show's argument enacted through every character who resists him, who rebuilds after him, who refuses to let his existence become the definition of what the world is that the bomb being still present does not mean the bomb gets to keep winning. The world that the bomb made includes tree trunks and her apple pies. It includes Marceline and her songs. It includes Jake and his sandwiches and his family and his enormous, uncomplicated love for a world he did not create and cannot save from entropy but chooses to inhabit fully anyway. The Lich is also in this world. And the world's response to the Lich is not to pretend he isn't there, not to develop a philosophical counter-argument sufficient to defeat him in debate, but to be the thing he is not to be present, warm, specific, rooted in relationship, invested in the particular moment that is happening right now, rather than in the universal conclusion that all moments eventually reach. This is, ultimately, Adventure Time's answer to the nuclear allegory as much as to the philosophical one. The weapon made the world worse. The world is still worth living in. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and neither cancels the other, and the task is not to resolve the tension between them, but to live in it with as much grace as possible. Part 4. Extended, Possession, Identity, and the Problem of the Self. What does it mean to be a self? This question is one that philosophy has been arguing about for at least as long as anyone has been writing philosophy down, and it is a question that the Lich's method of operating forces Adventure Time to engage with, whether the show's creators intended it as a philosophical statement or simply as an interesting narrative mechanic. The answer you give to what is a self determines how you feel about everything the Lich does, because the Lich's relationship to the bodies he inhabits depends entirely on whether those bodies contain selves that matter or simply configurations of matter that happen to have been organized in certain ways. The Lich operates as though the answer is the latter. In his framework, a body is a tool, a sufficiently complex tool, more complex than a rock or a sword or the amber that temporarily contained him, but a tool nonetheless. It processes sensory input and generates motor output and maintains certain internal states, and that is, at bottom, what it is. The thing that we call the self in everyday experience is a story the body tells itself about continuity, a convenient fiction that allows a biological organism to plan forward in time and maintain consistent behavior across contexts. Useful, as survival mechanisms go, but not more real than any other useful fiction. From this perspective, the Lich inhabiting Princess Bubblegum's body and using it to pursue his goals is not ethically different from picking up a sword someone else was using and swinging it in a different direction. The sword does not have preferences about who wields it. Neither, in the Lich's understanding, does the body. The counterposition, the one that the show holds, through the way it loves its characters, through the grief it asks you to feel when a character is taken over or diminished or changed against their will, is that the self is real. Not necessarily in the metaphysical sense that requires you to commit to a view about souls or consciousness as fundamentally non-material, but real in the practical sense that matters. Persons have experiences that are specifically theirs, relationships that exist specifically between them and others, histories and values and ongoing concerns that constitute something worth protecting. When you displace a person's consciousness, you end something the particular ongoing project of that particular self, even if you do not damage the body. The body goes on. But the person is interrupted, and the interruption costs something real. Adventure Time is not asking you to resolve the philosophical debate about the nature of consciousness. It is simply placing you in a world where the consequences of the two positions play out in dramatic form and allowing you to feel which one seems more true to whatever you actually experience when you are experiencing yourself. And most people watching the Lich inhabit Princess Bubblegum find that they feel something. They feel that something wrong has happened, that something has been taken, that the princessness of Princess Bubblegum is a real thing and its displacement is a real loss, even if the body carrying her name is still walking around and talking. That feeling, the felt reality of the other person as a genuine someone, as a center of experience that matters, is the thing the Lich's philosophy cannot account for. His framework is perfectly coherent at the level of physics. It fails at the level of what it is like to be someone and to know someone and to lose someone. It fails at the phenomenological level, the level of lived experience, the level where all the things that make life feel like something actually operate. And this is not a failure that can be corrected by adjusting the framework's variables. The framework does not have a variable for phenomenology. It has dismissed phenomenology as an epiphenomenon of matter, as a story matter tells itself about its own organization, and so it cannot account for why the story matters. It cannot account for why it matters to Finn that the person in front of him is the actual person rather than a puppet wearing that person's appearance. It cannot account for why Bimo naming the Lich Jerry constitutes a form of gift rather than an irritant. The Lich thinks in systems. Adventure Time thinks in persons. And the gap between those two modes of thinking is where the show makes its most quietly radical philosophical argument. That persons are not merely instances of systems. That the specific individual is not reducible to the general category they instantiate, that the relationship between two particular beings is a thing with its own reality that cannot be derived from or substituted by any amount of understanding about beings in general. This is why the possession is wrong, even if you accept all of the Lich's metaphysical premises, even if consciousness is just a pattern of information processing in biological matter, even if the self is a useful fiction rather than a metaphysical substance. Even if persons are, at the level of physics, nothing more than temporarily organized matter on its way to being less organized matter. The wrongness of possession is not metaphysical, it is relational. It is the violation of a particular ongoing story between particular beings, a story that exists nowhere in the physical universe, but that is, for the beings involved in it, the most real thing in their experience of being alive. The Lich cannot enter a relationship. He can inhabit bodies and use them for his purposes. But he cannot be in relation to someone in the way that Finn is in relation to Jake, or Jake to his family, or Prismo to the friends who occasionally visit. He can perform the physical proximity of relationship. He can wear Billy's face and speak to Finn using Billy's voice, but he cannot have the experience of actually caring about the person he is facing, of wanting something good for them, of being affected by their well-being in the way that beings who are in relationship are affected by each other. And it is the experience of this incapacity, realized too late in the extinct world, sitting alone on bones with only BMO's one-sided friendship to suggest what he might have been if the wheel had turned differently, that constitutes the Lich's deepest and most quietly devastating failure. Part 5, Extended, The Ceaseless Wheel, What It Means to Be Certain. There is a specific kind of freedom in absolute certainty, and the Lich has it. And it is worth understanding why it is appealing before we examine why it is ultimately catastrophic. When you are certain, genuinely, completely certain, in a way that does not permit doubt, you do not have to make decisions in the way that uncertain beings make decisions. You do not have to weigh evidence. You do not have to update your understanding when new information arrives. You do not have to sit with the discomfort of not knowing what the right thing to do is, of making your best guess and then living with the consequences of having guessed while knowing you could have guessed differently. You do not have to be afraid of being wrong. For conscious beings who spend most of their existence in a state of chronic uncertainty, not just about grand philosophical questions, but about everyday practical ones, about what to do and how to be, and what matters, and whether the choices they are making are going to produce the outcomes they are hoping for. The Lich's certainty can look, in certain lights, like a form of peace. He is not tormented by doubt. He is not lying awake at night wondering if he made the right call. He knows what he is, and he knows what he is doing, and he knows how it all ends. And that knowing insulates him completely from the particular form of suffering that uncertainty produces. Adventure Time acknowledges this as a genuine form of relief. The show does not pretend that certainty is unattractive. It understands the appeal, which is part of why it takes the Lich's philosophy seriously rather than simply dismissing it as obviously crazy. But the show also dramatizes, with careful attention, the cost. The cost of certainty is engagement. The cost of already knowing how everything ends is the inability to be surprised by how anything is going right now. The cost of being the wheel rather than the person is that you cannot learn. You cannot be changed by what you encounter. You cannot form a relationship that affects you, because being affected requires being open to the possibility that the other person brings something you did not already have. The Lich has not learned anything in 65 million years. He cannot. His nature is fixed in a way that Finn's nature is not, that Sweet Pea's nature is not, that even the Ice King's nature, as deeply entrenched in his curse as it is not. He is the same thing he was when the comet hit the Cretaceous. He will be the same thing in any possible future in which he still exists. His certainty is the certainty of something that has been finished, rather than the certainty of something that has arrived at a conclusion through genuine reasoning. He is not certain because he has thought it through. He is certain because there is no he underneath the certainty that could do the thinking differently. This is what Finn recognizes in the moment of calling the Lich boring. "You're so evil, it's boring. You're basic, man." It is one of the most honest and most penetrating things any character says about the Lich in the entire series, delivered with the bluntness of a teenager who has not yet learned that some conclusions are supposed to be expressed more tactfully. The Lich is boring, in the specific sense that boring means he is always the same. There is nothing new to discover about him. There is no dimension of his character that will surprise you once you have understood the basic principle. He is a function, not a character complete and unchanging and, by that very completeness, incapable of growth or surprise or the kind of depth that comes from having been shaped by experience. The Lich's response to being called basic is one of the most remarkable moments in the show's final seasons. Rather than being offended, he agrees. Yes, just that. He does not argue the point. He does not feel diminished by it. Because from within his framework, being certain about what you are is a virtue, not a limitation. The mortal world doubts. He knows. He has always known. What he does not know, what the certainty prevents him from knowing, is what the doubting and questioning actually produces. He has never experienced the specific form of richness that comes from not knowing what you are and having to find out by living. He has never had the experience of being surprised by himself, of discovering that what he thought was fixed in him was actually more flexible than he knew, of finding in some corner of himself a capacity for something he had not expected. He has been the wheel for so long that he cannot imagine being anything else, and the imagination of being something else is the very thing that would allow him to choose differently. This is the poverty inside the certainty, not the poverty of having less than others, the poverty of being unable to become more than you already are. Part 9, Extended. What the extinct world reveals about need. The detail that breaks something open in the extinct world storyline. The detail that changes the emotional register from horror to something closer to tragedy is not the bones. It is not the silence or the scale of the loss or even the image of the Lich sitting alone in the universe he emptied. It is BMO calling him Jerry. Because BMO's naming of the Lich is not a joke, though it carries the surface texture of one. It is an act of recognition. BMO, in whatever way BMO is capable of it, has looked at the only other presence in the universe and decided that presence deserves a name, deserves to be addressed as something particular rather than something general, deserves the small but real acknowledgement of having an identity that can be referred to, called upon, directed speech toward. This is the thing the Lich has never had, not in 65 million years, not once. He has been feared, he has been opposed, he has been sealed in amber and transported to prisons and turned into a baby and had his head ripped off by a sweater. These are all forms of acknowledgement, they all say, implicitly. You are real and you are dangerous, and what you do matters enough to warrant a response. But they are not the same as being known. They are responses to what the Lich does, not to what the Lich is. Fear and opposition engage with the function. only relationship engages with the person. And the Lich, philosophically, does not believe he is a person. He believes he is a function, the ceaseless wheel, the agent of Golb the end. He has constructed a cosmology in which the category of person does not apply to him, in which his existence is better described in terms of forces and principles than in terms of consciousness and relationship. This cosmology protects him, in a sense, or would protect him, if it were actually true. If he were simply a force, then the absence of relationship would not constitute a loss. Forces do not experience absence. But the extinct world Lich's response to his situation reveals that the cosmology is not actually true. He is not simply a force. He is something that can be hurt by the silence of the God he serves. He is something that can fall into depression or crisis of faith, the more precise diagnosis when achievement fails to produce meaning. He is something that can notice the arrival of Simon and Fiona and Cake and respond to that arrival with something that looks very much like interest, something that has the texture of wanting rather than of being directed. He is something that can be named Jerry, and, rather than simply continuing to sit on the bones the way a force would continue to behave identically regardless of how it is referred to, can be in some small way reached by the naming. He needed to be known. He has always needed to be known. The 65 million years of devotion to Golb was, at some level beneath the philosophical architecture he built over it, a search for a relationship that could hold him, a relationship with something large enough and permanent enough and real enough to constitute a genuine other, to see him in return, to receive what he was offering and be changed by it. He chose the most permanent and real thing he could conceive of, a cosmic principle underlying the physics of existence, and gave it everything. And the principle did not see him. Principles do not see anyone. This is not a failure unique to the Lich. It is a failure recognizable to anyone who has ever tried to solve the problem of loneliness by doing something impressive, by achieving something, building something, becoming something in the hope that achievement will produce the recognition that relationship had not provided. The achievement rarely produces the recognition, not because achievement is worthless, but because what you needed was not someone to be impressed by what you did. What you needed was someone who would know you regardless of what you did. Someone to whom you were a person before you were a function. Prismo understood this. Prismo, who exists at the center of time with the power to reshape reality, and who spends most of his existence desperately wanting Jake to visit, not to make a wish, not to need something from the Wishmaster, but to just be there, to be a friend who came to hang out, rather than a customer who came to transact. The power does not resolve the loneliness. The cosmic significance does not fill the room. What fills the room is the friend who shows up because they wanted to, and that is worth more than every wish Prismo has ever granted. The Lich had the power. He never had the friend. And by the time he understood that the friend was what he needed, he had made it impossible for anyone to be one. Part 10 extended, meaning impermanence and the refusal to despair. Let us be honest about something before we conclude. The Lich's premises about the universe are largely correct. Not in the details, not in the specific claim that extinction is the appropriate response, not in the theology of GOLB, but in the broad strokes of what he is pointing at when he talks about impermanence and entropy and the scale of time against which individual lives are measured. Things end. Everyone you love will die, or you will die before them and they will mourn you. Everything built will eventually be unmade. The specific details of your life, the particular texture of the people you love, and the moments you share with them, and the small accumulations of meaning that make up what it feels like to be you, will not persist indefinitely. The universe was not built with your particular persistence as a priority. The cosmos is genuinely indifferent to whether you, specifically, make it through the week. These are true things, and acknowledging them does not make you a nihilist. It makes you honest. The nihilist move is not in acknowledging these truths. It is in treating them as the only relevant truths, in treating impermanence as a verdict on presence, in deciding that because things end, their existing did not matter, because love does not last forever, it was not real, because consciousness arose by accident from unconscious processes, it has no value, because the universe will one day be cold and dark, the warmth available right now is an illusion. All of these moves are the same move. From this has a limit to, therefore this is worthless. And all of them are wrong, not because the limits are not real, but because the logic does not hold. Having a limit does not make something worthless. All the most valuable things have limits. All the best experiences, all the most meaningful relationships, all the moments of genuine connection and beauty and understanding. Their having limits is not their failure, it is their texture. The fact that a conversation ends is not an argument against having the conversation. The fact that a person dies is not an argument against loving them. The fact that you will eventually lose access to this moment is not an argument against being fully in it. The Lich's error is philosophical, and also, beneath the philosophy, something more personal. He refuses to be in the moment. He cannot be in the moment. To be fully present in a moment requires accepting its impermanence, requires being willing to have it end because you were really there for it while it lasted, requires a kind of courage or at least a kind of willingness that the Lich's framework cannot accommodate. He has been so focused on the ending that he has never been able to experience the thing that ends. He has been the wheel for so long that he has never been the rider. Sweet Pea has the thing the Lich never managed. He is in the moment. He is there for the conversation with tree trunks, there for the first day of school and the bullying and the confusion and the small triumph of figuring out that he does not need the King of Oo's approval, because he has parents at home who love him without conditions. He is there for all of it, with his whole enormous confused self, not managing the experience from a distance or treating it as data about the world's movement toward eventual entropy. He is in it, and being in it is the thing that makes it mean something. Finn is in it, Jake is in it, Prismo is in it, with his pickles and his screens and is waiting for friends to visit. Marceline is in it every time she picks up her bass and makes the grief into something that can be shared. Princess Bubblegum is in it every time she cares about the result of an experiment she has been running for a century. Every time she chooses to be moved by something that, from a cold enough distance, she could simply analyze and set aside. The Lich is not in it. He is above it, outside it, positioned at the endpoint of it and oriented toward that endpoint with his whole vast ancient consciousness. He is at the heat death of the universe before the universe has gotten there, and he is waiting for everything between here and there to hurry up and catch up to where he already stands. He is missing everything. All of it. Every moment that makes existence feel like something rather than nothing, every experience that provides the evidence against his philosophy's conclusions, every piece of information that might have led him somewhere different if he had been capable of receiving it. He is the most knowledgeable being in Ooh, older than any of them, present for more of the universe's history than any of them can imagine, and he knows nothing about what it is like to be alive. That is the tragedy, not the extinction, not the pile of bones. The tragedy is that the wheel was always in the wrong place, pointed toward the ending rather than through the middle of the thing, missing the only part that mattered by insisting on arriving at the end before it had time to develop. You are in the middle of the thing, right now. Whatever the specific texture of where you are and what surrounds you tonight, you are inside the thing that the Lich spent 65 million years pointing away from. You are in the part that matters. Stay in it as long as you can. Be here as fully as the moment allows. Let the warmth that is available be as warm as it can be. These are not instructions for defeating entropy or preventing endings or solving the philosophical problem of impermanence. They are just instructions for being where you already are, for inhabiting the present moment with the full weight of your consciousness, which is the only thing that makes the present moment into a home rather than a waiting room. The Lich is waiting for the end. You are already somewhere. Be there. Interlude, the shape of evil in animation. Why the Lich works. There is something worth pausing on that goes slightly sideways from the main arc of the Lich's mythology. The question of why he works as well as he does. Why he continues to haunt the show even in episodes where he is not present. Why mentioning his name to someone who has watched Adventure Time produces a specific reaction that is different from the reaction produced by mentioning any other villain in any other animated series, including some much more widely discussed ones. Part of the answer is Ron Perlman's voice, which we have already touched on. But voice is not the whole answer, and thinking it is would sell the character's conception short. The voice would not work if what it had to say were not worth the delivery. The delivery would not land if the philosophy behind it were not genuine. What the Lich represents in animation is genuinely unusual, because animation, as a medium, has strong conventional incentives towards certain kinds of villainy. The medium of animation has traditionally been oriented toward younger audiences, which has produced a set of conventions about how evil should look and what it should want and how it should ultimately be handled, conventions that even sophisticated animated series often work within or against, rather than simply ignoring. Evil in animation is typically something that can be understood, and in being understood, can be resolved. The villain has a wound, a desire, a point of origin from which their villainy grew, and if you can address that origin through redemption, through defeat that acknowledges the underlying pain, through the hero proving that the world can be different from what the villain believes, the evil can be transformed or contained in a way that feels complete. The Lich cannot be handled this way. He does not have a wound, in the relevant sense. He did not become the embodiment of extinction because something happened to him that broke something good. He emerged from a comet as the embodiment of extinction, which is his nature rather than his trauma. There is no underlying better version of the Lich that the right intervention might reach. There is no conversation that would help. There is no gesture of understanding that would, by being understood, change the relationship between him and existence. This is profoundly uncomfortable for narrative, which tends to operate on the assumption that every villain has a reason, and that reasons sufficiently understood open pathways toward resolution. The Lich closes that pathway. He does not have a reason in the sense that requires a response. He has a nature, and natures are not argued with. The show handles this by doing something that most animated series do not do. It places the Lich in a cosmological frame rather than a personal one. He is not personal evil. He is structural evil, evil at the level of the universe's physics, evil as a force rather than as a being with choices and a history that led to those choices. This framing makes him genuinely frightening in a way that personal evil rarely manages, because personal evil can be addressed by addressing the person. Structural evil requires something different, not the defeat of an individual, but the ongoing navigation of conditions that the individual embodies and that will continue to obtain regardless of what happens to the individual in any particular encounter. The show's most honest statement about this is the simple fact that the Lich never stays defeated, not because the writing needs him to return for narrative reasons, though that is also true, but because structural evil is not the kind of thing that gets defeated in a single climactic moment and then stays defeated. It persists. It finds new shapes. It returns in forms that the previous defeat did not account for. The amber cracks. The body regenerates. The farm world version appears. The Hand in Whispers has knowledge of the Lich's defeats in other timelines. Because the Lich is not located in any particular timeline, he is a property of timelines in general, appearing wherever the conditions produce him. This is the literary truth that the Lich embodies. Some things about the world cannot be resolved by heroism, only navigated by persistent, committed presence. The hero does not win over entropy. The hero lives well within the conditions entropy creates. Finn does not defeat the Lich permanently, but Finn builds a life that is worth living, builds relationships that are worth having, does good in the moments available to him. And this is the actual form that victory takes when victory means choosing to be fully human in the presence of forces larger than humanity. There is also something worth noting about the Lich's aesthetic function within the show's tonal architecture. Adventure Time operates across an enormous tonal range. It can be silly and absurd and heartwarming and deeply sad, sometimes within the same episode, and the range of what the show is willing to engage with emotionally is one of its defining strengths. The Lich serves within this architecture as the anchoring point of genuine dread. His existence in the show's mythology allows everything else to be placed in relationship to the worst thing. Every moment of warmth and connection and growth is implicitly, quietly meaningful, in part because the show has established what it exists against. The Lich is the reason that Prismo's friendship with Jake is not just pleasant, but important. He is the reason that Tree Trunk's naming a baby matters. He is the reason that every episode where characters choose to be kind to each other is doing something beyond what it appears to be doing at the surface level. He is, in the structural sense, the thing that makes the light visible by being the most complete available expression of dark. Interlude 2. The Lich Across Media, Distant Lands and Fiona and Cake. In the years since the original run of Adventure Time concluded, the franchise has expanded into additional content that has fleshed out the Lich's mythology in ways that are worth considering alongside everything we have already examined. Adventure Time, Distant Lands, the HBO Max continuation, includes the Lich in ways that revisit his established characterization while fitting it into the changed landscape of a post-series story. Together Again, The longest entry in the Distant Lands collection deals explicitly with what happens after death, and the Lich is present in the dead worlds that Finn and Jake navigate. A reminder that death itself is his domain in a way that extends across whatever comes after physical life ends. He is not merely the force that ends consciousness. He is present in the territory that consciousness enters after the body stops. This is a quiet but significant expansion of his mythology. He is not just in the world of the living, threatening to end the experiences of things that are currently having experiences. He is also in the afterlife, which suggests a more pervasive presence in the structure of existence than his primary function implies. He is not waiting at the end of the road. He is the road and the end both. Fiona and Cake, the later spin-off, provides the most philosophically substantial new material in the Extinct World arc that we have already examined at length, but it also offers something more subtle across its broader narrative. A version of the Lich who has been reduced from cosmic horror to something smaller by the fact of his success. The most frightening thing about the Extinct World: Lich is not anything he does, it is the absence of anything he does. The horror is in the stillness, in the bones, in the silence where the terror used to be. This inversion of the character's usual impact is one of the most clever things either spin-off does with the Lich's mythology. His power, in the main series, comes from his certainty and his motion, the sense of something relentless in motion toward a goal that cannot be deflected. Remove the goal by having it achieved, and what remains is not power. What remains is weight without direction, certainty without anything left to be certain toward, the wheel with nothing left to roll over. He is still technically the most powerful evil entity in the Extinct World universe. But the power has become purely abstract, because power only expresses itself through engagement with the world, and the world he has made does not provide the friction necessary for engagement. This is the show making its most sophisticated point about power. It is not a property of the self, but a property of the relationship between the self and the environment it operates within. Take away the environment, and you take away the power, regardless of how much of it you nominally possess. The Lich in an empty universe is not the most powerful being. He is the only being, and the only being, by definition, has nothing to be more powerful than. He is reduced, ultimately, by his own success. The thing he was most certain about, that he could achieve what he was after, turned out to be true. And the truth of it took everything else away. Part 1. Extended. On feeling afraid of the right things. There is a form of fear that is oriented correctly and a form of fear that is oriented in the wrong direction, and the Lich is useful for thinking about the distinction between them. The wrong direction fear is fear of the Lich as a character within Adventure Time, anxiety about whether Finn will win, whether the Candy Kingdom will survive, whether the multiverse will be saved from the cosmic criminals the Lich releases from the Citadel. These fears are appropriate within the narrative, and the show does not discourage you from feeling them. But they are not the fears the Lich is actually meant to evoke. The correctly oriented fear the Lich is meant to produce is not about what happens in any particular episode. It is about the thing the Lich represents in the broader philosophical sense, the reality of entropy, of impermanence, of the fundamental indifference of the universe to the projects of consciousness. Fear of the actual thing, rather than fear of its narrative avatar. And Adventure Time wisely, carefully, over the course of its entire run, teaches its audience that this correctly oriented fear is real and worth having, and also not the thing that should organize your life. The fear of endings is appropriate. The response to that fear that the Lich represents: orient everything toward the ending, hurry it along, eliminate the things that will end before they can end on their own terms, is what the show argues against. The alternative it proposes is not the elimination of fear, it is the decision to be fully present despite the fear. To love things that will end, to invest in moments that will pass, to build relationships with beings who will die, which is to say all relationships, which is to say the only relationships available. Finn and Jake are afraid sometimes. They are brave not because fear is absent, but because the presence of fear does not change what they decide to do. This is the specific courage that Adventure Time valorizes, not fearlessness, which would be inhuman and therefore not meaningful, but the choice to act from love even when fear makes other options available. The Lich has no fear. This is presented as power, and in certain tactical situations it is power. But it is also a form of poverty. Fear, for conscious beings, is information. It is the self's report about what it values. about what it would be losing if something bad happened, about what it has that is worth protecting. A being without fear has nothing to lose, which means it has nothing it actually cares about, which means it is living in the universe as a function rather than as a person. The fear of losing the people you love tells you that you love them. The Lich does not know this because he has never loved anything. The Lich does not know what it is to have something to lose. And so the Lich does not know what it is to be alive, in the sense that most matters in the sense of being a self with something at stake in how things go. You have something at stake. The stakes are, eventually, everything. The correct response to this is not to eliminate your stakes, but to be fully invested in them for as long as they last. This is what the Lich teaches by failing to do it. This is what he demonstrates by negative example, across 65 million years of existence that contained everything except the one thing that would have made any of it worth having. The relationship, the presence, the warmth of being known by something that also knows it will be lost eventually and stays anyway and calls you by your name. Be Jerry? BMO would probably say, if BMO were giving a motivational speech, which is admittedly not a very BMO thing to do. But be Jerry in the sense of being something that gets named by the things that love you. Be the thing in the room that matters to the other things in the room, not because you are permanent or invincible or beyond the reach of ending, but because you are there, fully, and you have made the space warmer than it was before you arrived. That is the answer. That is what the ceaseless wheel never figured out how to be. The question of redemption. Could the Lich have been different? There is a question that Adventure Time raises implicitly across the entirety of its Lich mythology and never fully answers, which is characteristic of the show's approach to hard questions. Could the Lich have been otherwise? Is there a version of events in which the green comet that hit the Cretaceous 65 million years ago produced something different? In which whatever fragment of Golb's nature was deposited into this corner of the universe found a different expression, not extinction, but something that change, which is the comet's stated purpose, could have meant? Sweet Pea provides the most direct evidence that the answer might be yes. Sweet Pea is, at the level of essence and origin, the same being as the Lich, the same comet-derived consciousness, the same fragment of Golb's influence, the same fundamental nature. What changed is the context. The body shaped by guardian blood rather than nuclear fallout. The parents who were tree trunks and Mr. Pig rather than a world already halfway destroyed. The first experiences of consciousness that included being loved and named and welcomed rather than being deposited into a world in the middle of destroying itself. The show does not make this explicit, does not say, if only the Lich had received love as a child, he would have turned out differently, because that framing is too simple, and Adventure Time is not a simple show. But it allows the implication to sit there, uncomfortable and unresolved, in the space between Sweet Pea's gentleness and the Lich's ancient certainty. The same force, different soil. This is philosophically significant because it speaks to questions about determinism and moral responsibility that philosophy has argued about for centuries. Is the Lich responsible for what he is? He did not choose his nature. He did not choose to be deposited on Earth as a comet of extinction rather than heroism. He did not choose the nuclear war that gave him his current form. He did not choose the framework of Golb's scholarship that organized his understanding of his purpose. These things happened to him, in whatever sense happened to applies to something like the Lich, before he had any capacity to choose differently. And yet he speaks, he reasons, he makes strategic decisions, he chooses the timing of his actions, he selects Billy as his vessel rather than some other host. He plans the Citadel infiltration and executes it with precision. Whatever he is at the level of nature, he operates in the world as something with agency, and agency implies the capacity for choice, and choice implies some form of responsibility. Adventure Time does not resolve this tension. The show is too honest about the complexity of moral responsibility to offer a clean verdict. What it does instead is create both the Lich fully realized, given the most complete expression of his nature available, and Sweet Pea the demonstration that the nature is not the destiny. Both things are true. The Lich is what he is because of what he is, and what he is not inevitable because Sweet Pea exists. The tragedy of the Lich is partly that he could not know this. He existed before Sweet Pea demonstrated the alternative. He spent 65 million years in the only version of his own nature available to him, which was the version that understood itself as the ceaseless wheel, the last scholar of Golb, the end. He could not step outside this framework to examine it, because you cannot step outside the thing you are constituted by any more than a person can step outside their own consciousness to evaluate it from a neutral position. He was locked into himself in the deepest possible way. And yet Sweet Pea escaped, or was rerouted, or whatever the right word is for what happens when the guardian blood replaces the nuclear waste, and the new consciousness that emerges reaches for warmth instead of extinction. It is not escape in the sense of having chosen to leave Sweet Pea, did not choose any more than the Lich chose. It is transformation, happening from the outside in, changing the conditions so thoroughly that the same force expressed itself entirely differently. This suggests that the answer to could the Lich have been different is yes, but not by the Lich's own effort, not by self-examination or philosophical revision or the kind of internal change that comes from insight. The change required external conditions, different circumstances, different first experiences, a body shaped by healing rather than destruction, parents who loved him without knowing what he was or what he had been. This is both hopeful and sobering. Hopeful because it means the force of destruction is not cosmically locked into its function, that even something as ancient and certain as the Lich carries within it the possibility of expressing differently. Sobering because the transformation required something the Lich could not provide for himself. It required other people, acting from love, giving something to a being that had never expected to receive it and had no framework for asking for it. Which brings us back, as everything about the Lich eventually does, to the same conclusion that every thread in this exploration has wound toward. Other people. The presence of other people, treating you as a person rather than a function, offering what they offer freely rather than because you have made a good enough argument for deserving it. The warmth that exists in relationship rather than in achievement. The naming, the apple pies, the first day of school, the pickles kept fresh in case someone visits. These are the things the Lich never had and the things Sweet Pea has in abundance. And the difference between the Lich and Sweet Pea is entirely explained by the presence or absence of these things. This is Adventure Time's most radical philosophical claim. Not that love conquers evil in some triumphant dramatic sense. Not that goodness defeats darkness through strength or will or cosmic destiny. But that the thing which makes a being destructive rather than generative, the thing which points the force toward extinction rather than protection, is the absence of relationship. And the presence of relationship, real relationship, offered freely, maintained with love across the ordinary texture of daily life, is the condition under which even the most ancient destructive force available to the universe can grow into something that stands between its parents and danger. You cannot argue the Lich into being Sweet Pea. You cannot defeat the Lich into being Sweet Pea. But tree trunks can love the thing that fell out of the sky into her yard until it becomes something worth knowing. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the whole point. A final note on watching stories about darkness. There is something worth saying about why we watch stories about villains like the Lich. Why we spend time, hours of it, evenings, the particular quiet hours before sleep with characters whose worldviews are antithetical to everything we would say we value. Why the philosophy of a cosmic nihilist in a cartoon about a boy and his dog is something that can hold attention for the length of this exploration. Part of the answer is that we recognize things in these dark philosophies. Not because we share them, or not only because we sometimes feel their pull, but because they are engaging seriously with real things. The Lich is not wrong that entropy exists. He is not hallucinating the impermanence of consciousness or manufacturing the indifference of the universe out of personal pathology. He is looking at real features of existence and responding to them badly, catastrophically, in ways that compound rather than address what he identifies as the problem. But the looking itself is not delusional. When you spend time with the Lich's philosophy, really spend time with it, as this exploration has tried to do, giving it the attention it deserves rather than dismissing it as just cartoon villainy, you do not emerge agreeing with him. But you emerge having been in conversation with the actual dark, not the manufactured spookiness of horror meant to entertain you with fear, the real dark. The awareness that things end, that the universe is vast and largely indifferent, that consciousness is rare and fragile and will eventually be over. And having been in honest conversation with the real dark, you emerge with something more valuable than you had before. Not answers to the hard questions. The questions do not have answers in the resolution sense, only in the engagement sense. But a clearer sense of what you are actually working with, what the stakes actually are, what the things that matter actually cost to maintain. The Lich helps you understand why warmth is remarkable, why connection is worth the vulnerability it requires, why the fact that things end is not an argument against beginning them, but is rather, in a precise and important way, the condition that makes beginning them mean anything at all. Impermanence is not the enemy of meaning. It is the ground of meaning. Nothing that lasted forever could matter in the way that things that end matter. Nothing that could not be lost could be held in the specific way that things which can be lost are held. The briefness is not the tragedy. The briefness is what makes the thing precious rather than ordinary. The Lich, in his 65 million years of certainty, never learned this. He was too focused on the end to be in the middle. He was too committed to the destination to notice the journey. He was the wheel, always rolling, always headed somewhere, and he reached the somewhere and it was a pile of bones. You are somewhere in the middle. The middle is everything. Be here for it.